So a huge welcome to Stewart Home. Welcome to the Indie Book Club. And Stewart, you're a provocateur, prankster, author, filmmaker, artist. Not necessarily in that order, and also several of those things at once as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, I think I'm wearing the T-shirt. If you can see,
His t-shirt
traveling in several
says
directions at once.
moving in several directions at once. Yes, I think
Yeah,
that's a very apt t-shirt for you, definitely.
although it's off
And
screen.
sorry?
It's off screen most of the time. But yeah,
And you are the author of Fascist Yoga. And before we get into discussing the book really exposes yoga's sort of dark history, if you like. And before we get into that, I thought it'd be quite good to start from the beginning and step by step go through your career a little bit and how that leads to fascist yoga. I do think you've made a career out of attacking anything that the middle class holds dear. Is that a fair description?
well, not I haven't got around to everything quite yet. I haven't done a book on cricket, but I don't like cricket. We never did it at school. We did football or soccer, as Americans call it, and cross-country running, and that was all we did.
Oh, well, that sounds quite a lot.
Although, my cousins who grow up working class in Wales, they appreciate rugby, which is beyond me as well. But that's a different country. So,
Well, Wales and rugby are definitely synonymous. So, as well as Wales and rain. So,
yeah. Wales and a beautiful language as well,
well,
which is growing in its use, which is fantastic. Although I haven't learned any.
no, neither have I. And I went to school in Wales, so I have less excuse.
Yeah, you have less excuse.
Yeah.
My mother, who was born in Wales, learnt some as an adult. But yeah, growing up in South Wales in an Irish family, you're not going to, in the 40s and 50s, you're not going to learn a lot of Welsh. But she did
No,
learn
I
some as an
suppose
adult.
not. But
Yeah.
it is great that they've made such an effort to revive the language because now you have quite a few Welsh medium schools and, kids are really encouraged to learn it, which is
Yeah,
great.
no, I mean, it's really fantastic because, we have to preserve kind of our smaller languages. I mean, losing them is a huge loss to everyone, not just the speakers, but for the speakers, it's their whole culture. So it's been fantastic to see what's happened to Welsh and Welsh speakers and see the numbers increase. Although they were never really low, you know what I mean? There's always been, it's not like Cornish where it died out and had to be revived. There's always been Welsh speakers.
Well, especially in North Wales. So, speaking of your school days, that's probably a really good place to start because I saw a podcast that you did, and you mentioned that actually by remaining strictly within the school rules with your school uniform, you actually managed to piss the teachers off even more than the kids who were wearing flares or had their hair really long. And this is probably a start of a very long career of poking the bear with a stick. Is that
Yeah, probably. That was the summer of 1976 was kind of, and we had the Green Goddesses, a very hot summer, and there was a fireman's strike, so we had the Army Green Goddesses on the street, and I discovered punk rock as a 14-year-old, or kind of London punk rock over the summer, and went back to school and discovered one other girl in my year had discovered punk rock, so we were the two punks in the 7 classes in the school.
how did you recognize each other?
Well, you could tell by our hair had got shorter
Oh, okay,
because it
right.
was the 70s, so
Yeah.
long hair was the fashion, and the boys all wanted to have their ties as wide as possible. They try and make these hugely wide ties which wouldn't go down very low because they'd made them so wide. And they'd wear wedgies, which were the platform shoes. You weren't allowed to. They went up at the back, the heel to make you look a bit taller. But if you were into punk rock, you wanted a flat shoe. You wanted straight trousers, and Oxford bags were the big thing with the kids then because it was what came out of the skinhead was then the suede head and then the boot boy look. So the look at my school was boot boy. So it was the Oxford bags and the picture shirts, the tank tops and all that stuff. But, huge flares. So when you could recognise the other person who got into punk because we were kind of making everything short and small. So I had a very thin 60s mod tie that I'd managed to find in the colour for the school tie. So we got lined up for uniform inspection, and they came down the line and they had a ruler to measure how high the wedge at the back of the shoe was and how wide the tie was and exactly how long your hair was. So they never had a problem with my hair, but it got cut short. So yeah, they just looked at me and said, where did you get that tie? That's pathetic. And looked at my trousers. Everyone else has got flares and I've got just straight trousers, straight leg. I mean, when you went to buy them back then, you know, you go to the market stall and the guy would say, what do you want straight trousers for? They're unfashionable. But, you know, by 78, everyone was wearing straight trousers.
So you were a pioneer.
Yeah, 2 years ahead.
Excellent. Yeah, I can imagine it. A girl with very short hair in the 70s must have stood out quite a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, well, that's how we recognised each other. And then it was all code, like, are you into EFM? Which meant extra fast music. Although if you listen to 70s punk rock, it isn't that fast, but it was faster than the kind of plodding heavy metal or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the big sort of culture at my school, music culture, was actually Northern Soul, although, you know, we were a long way from a Wigan casino, but kids did go up there. So the punk was a kind of minority thing, and the kind of progressive rock, the Pink Floyd and the heavy metal, was for the grammar school kids. We didn't listen to that.
Okay. And certainly no disco either, I imagine.
Oh, no, some disco was okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I mean, the punks weren't supposed to like it, but I like Northern Soul, so I always had problems with the punks as well, because it's like, well, you like good music, like, you know, whatever it was at the time, the Sex Pistols or the Stranglers. So why do you like that other stuff?
Yeah, well, it doesn't
you know,
preclude you from liking anything. You can like several genres of music, but actually it was that same podcast, there was some hilarious quote from Captain Sensible about the Sex Pistols music.
oh yeah, it sounded like Old Man Steptoe. It was a bad Black Sabbath demo, less popular, with Old Man Steptoe on vocals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when they got, you know, they raced to get a copy of anything in the UK when it came out and put it on and couldn't believe how bad it was. They were pretty good, the Damned, in the old days, especially when Brian James was on the guitar. I used to like them. Not so much. I saw them when they reformed, but without Brian James, they just weren't the same. Sadly dead now as well. But yeah, really show my age with these references as well.
A lot of the people we're talking about are sadly not on the face of the earth anymore. But,
no, exactly. A lot of good writers as well. So yeah.
So after school, there was a Hegel period, wasn't there? So...
Well, the immediate thing after school was a job making bonded cork products, which meant the floors of buses and stuff. Although I was cutting them up and counting them out, because if you were under 18, you weren't allowed to work the presses. But yeah, then I decided it was better to be on the dole than working in a factory or whatever.
Wow.
When we had a bit decent welfare system. And I spent a lot of time reading Marx and Hegel and things like that.
And this has made a lasting impact.
Yeah, it did make a lasting impact. It's good to read. I mean, the quotes kind of stick in the mind more, because Marx is a hugely gifted and very comic, when he puts his mind to it, writer. The ponderousness of Hegel makes it harder to remember the quotes, but there was something fantastic about it at the same time.
I've never heard Marx being described as a comic author.
Oh no, he's fantastic. You know, there's all the famous Marx quotes. You know, religion is the opium of the people, but it's all, you know, it's all the Hegelian inversions. There's a lot of really famous Marx quotes, and you know, a lot of really funny metaphors and put downs. He's a great put down artist, Marx.
Maybe I should read him then.
Yeah. You just have to pick out the right parts, you know.
Yeah. I think that religion is the opiate of the masses is definitely something I agree with. This is something that comes up again and again in your work as well, that holding anyone up to some sort of guru-like standard is pretty foolish, and you should actually start thinking for yourself.
No, exactly. You know, and Marx is a good way to start thinking rigorously, reading through it. You don't have to agree with everything. I mean, you know, he was wrong on certain subjects like America, but you know, fundamentally he's a solid, you know, political theorist, and wanting to apply it to the world. The philosophers have interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it, being another of the famous quotes. But, he's also a laugh a minute when you get in the right parts. I mean, even Theories of Surplus Value, which was never finished, there's a famous footnote which I rip off in one of my books about how the criminal creates all value in society, because without the criminal you wouldn't have the cop or the judge or the jailer and all these other things. Some really hilarious passages in that.
That's a different way of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've always been a big reader, haven't you? Were you a big reader at school, or did that come to you afterwards?
No, I used to, the TV was so boring in the 70s, so what else could you do? You had to wait for the Saturday 9 o'clock, and they'd show some German expressionist film like Metropolis or Nosferatu on BBC Two, when they still showed silent films on TV. And the Universal Frankensteins and Draculas were on Thames. They were on about 11 o'clock at night, and the kids' TV was like Blue Peter or Magpie, so you were left to read a book. So I read a lot of pulp fiction and non-fiction as well, lots of books about martial arts and stuff, but I'd read a book pretty much every day when I was a kid. So a lot of them were very short, 40,000 word novels. And one of the important things we all used to read at school was the New English Library youth culture books, so that was the skinhead books, written by Richard Moffat. His real name was Richard Allen. His real name was James Moffat. And all the Hells Angels books. The author I particularly liked was Mick Norman, who I learned years later was really called Lawrence James. And he actually edited a lot of the early Richard Allen skinhead books as well, but gave up on him because he got so fed up with the racism. But in his Hells Angels books, the gay angels were harder than the straight angels, and the angels were the only hope for freedom from an authoritarian British government after the government had smashed the Angry Brigade, if people remember that.
What was the Angry Brigade?
The Angry Brigade was a group in the early 70s that was busted, who attacked things like Miss World broadcast and prominent Tory politicians of the time, but they attacked property. They didn't kill anyone. They only attacked property, but they planted a few bombs and things. But obviously in the context of the kind of troubles in the north of Ireland, it was pretty tame, but there was a big trial over it, and they were a big deal back then. So you got different politics, and also I used to read a lot of Michael Moorcock, who I got to know later, a great bloke. Do you know Moorcock, who did the James Cornelius series? But that's the more intellectual side of his things, and the more literary praise in some of his later novels. But I started when I was about 12 on Elric, which are the fantasy novels, the kind of warriors. But yeah, I was reading all sorts of stuff. I mean, also people have probably forgotten, but figures like Lobsang Rampa, who was a fake Tibetan guru, really Cyril Henry Hoskins, a plumber's son from Devon. So he did these books like The Third Eye, and he claimed to have been, he'd tell you about going inside a UFO as a child and how he discovered all these strange objects, which are basically descriptions of things like knives and forks, but you have to remember in Tibet I would have seen these.
So clever.
And he was exposed by the guy who did the 7 years in Tibet, hired a private detective to follow him around to find out who he really was. So after he was exposed as being Cyril Henry Hoskins, he claimed that he'd been living in Thames Ditton and climbed up a tree and fallen out, which is when the spirit of the monk Rampa had entered his body. So he was genuinely the Tibetan monk. But I mean, I didn't take that stuff too seriously, and I used to read. Do you know Aleister Crowley?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's mentioned in Fascist Yoga, but I used to go to a shop called Dark They Were in Golden Eyed in St Anne's Passage in the 70s when I was still at school, and they sold lots of sci-fi stuff, and I came across Crowley there, the novels, Diary of a Drug Fiend, and Moonchild is the other one. So when I thought he was hilarious when you had all these chapter headings like heroin, as a kind of 12, 13, 14-year-old, I thought that was really funny. I never took his magic that seriously.
I'm sure, well, yes, exactly.
But some people did.
I was a big fan of Eric von Daniken.
I read those books as well. They were complete nonsense.
They were complete nonsense, and I was so I suppose I really wanted to believe they were true, and then he was done for fraud. I love the idea of, us not being alone in the universe and having, the desert being a landing strip for aliens and things like that. I just lapped that stuff up, and of course it was complete rubbish.
Yeah, ancient batteries and all that stuff. Then there was Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, if you remember that one.
Yes,
Pageant
I do.
Lee and Lincoln. And that was some French hoaxers who kind of were planting materials for them. That was a good one. It was all
Yeah.
exposed. Absolute nonsense as well. But all
Well,
those kind of books were I would also read all these books like John Gilbert's Secret Finding Arts of the World, which was Robert W. Smith writing fiction, but it was marketed in the UK in the 70s. I mean, they were older books, but they bought up the old rights when the Bruce Lee craze was on, and put them out as kind of genuine books. The UK publishers, when I came across them, but absolute rubbish, and it was never intended. It was a satire of tall tales from martial artists. He did a few books like that, but he did also write serious books on Chinese martial arts, was his real area of expertise. CIA operative, so he was in Taiwan and able to learn lots of Chinese martial arts there.
but you're into martial arts yourself, aren't you? And
Yeah, I do a little. Yeah.
is it Tai Chi now that you
Yeah,
like?
it's Tai Chi, a bit of Chen and a bit of Wu. Which, if people know the family styles, they know what I'm talking about. Chen's the original style. But I started with a really obscure one, Lam, which is a mixture of Yang and Sun, really. But there's lineages of this style. I just think it's nice. In the Wu, I really like the foot movements when you're turning around. So, and they've got a lot
Is
of
it like
emphasis.
ballet?
It's like ballet, yeah, but ballet for old people. It's not as difficult, but it is. To do it correctly, it takes a lot of practice and does take skill. But it's not as hard as ballet. But that's, one of the things that's interesting with the yoga, that a lot of the early yoga gurus had, well, Pierre Bernard and then later Richard Hittelman, they had ballerinas, essentially dancers, demonstrate their yoga moves, and the women demonstrating didn't get good from doing yoga, they got good from their dance training, so they looked very slick moving between the exercises. But yeah, a bit of that. And yeah, to go back to the childhood reading, my first novel, which I wrote some stories in the style, first of all, long short stories, and then write a novel because people like the short stories. I just thought you could rewrite all the kind of youth culture books I read. They got passed under the desks at school. I didn't like the Sven Hassel, which were the kind of tales of Nazi warfare and terror. But I never liked those books, fortunately. But
My
they were,
brother was a total fanatic. He loved those
yeah,
books.
I thought they were awful. There was the youth culture novels and the kind of James Herbert, the rats and stuff like that.
Oh, yes, I remember those were so big.
Everyone,
Like the
yeah.
rats and the cockroaches and the various. They were
Yeah, then the
horrible.
Crabs came out, Guy and Smith, which was, I didn't start reading those till after I'd left school, but we used to read them aloud to each other because when he started off, he was such a poor writer. He kind of got mediocre, so the books got less interesting. But the Crabs were first to be as big as rats, and then as big as cats, and then the size of a London taxi, and then as big as a bus. And when they appeared, it would be click, click, clickety click on the page. We thought they were absolutely hilarious, and
Yeah, I'm sure.
in my
Yeah.
group, we'd read them. We'd take turns reading them aloud.
Well, they
But,
certainly did the rounds in our school, and there were ones on spiders and all sorts of horrible things. It
oh
was,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
gross.
But the youth culture stuff I thought could just be reconfigured to kind of create something new. The first story I did, when class war were getting a lot of headlines in London, and I was never an anarchist, but through kind of left politics, you get to know anarchists and some of the people who'd gone to a thing called London Workers Group, joined class war, which we saw as a degeneration into anarchism. But I
So
thought.
you were never an anarchist, but you were associated with anarchism.
Well, I was never an anarchist, but I was also didn't like Bolshevism, so I wasn't a Trotskyist or a Stalinist. So if you were coming out of a more what you can call left communist position, like council communism or Situationist International or whatever, people would think you were an anarchist because they couldn't place what your politics were. But now with the internet, they can look it up and find out where they come from.
Everyone
But
gets pigeonholed very
But we
quickly.
would encounter the odd anarchist, and I would come across the people from class war, so it's quite funny to see them described in the newspapers as this huge threat. So I just thought you could take the style of the old youth culture novels about bikers and skinheads and rewrite it as a kind of tale about class war, but with so where in a biker novel you'd have a rivalry between the president and the lieutenant in the Hells Angels chapter, you transfer that into a kind of anarchist group, and then the guy who was the lieutenant would be thinking, but anarchists don't have leaders. I
Well,
can't think of
exactly. That's what I was
I've got
thinking.
to
It
take it
will
over.
never be a credible threat because how can they organize themselves?
Yeah, but also it's just a place where you can parody their belief that they don't have leaders, because when you look at the group, you would see leaders.
Huge seam of humor, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was how the early book started off. A combination of that and the fact that it was the 80s, so I was reading lots of postmodern theory as well, and particularly like Jean Baudrillard, because he basically took Marx's critique of alienation and commodification and flipped it on its head. So whereas Marx said it was bad, Baudrillard said it was good, the black cloud or hole or whatever he described it, the masses absorbing meaning. So I kind of thought, when you look back through literary history and you looked at the Surrealists or the Nouveau Roman, people like Alain Robbe-Grillet, Nathalie Sarraute, Claude Simon, those writers, I read all that stuff when I was a kid, teenager. In translation, my French isn't that good. They inscribed elements of pulp fiction within their prose, but had a more experimental narrative form or non-narrative form generally. I didn't adhere to kind of strict storytelling techniques. And I thought you could apply with Baudrillard the notion of simulation that he used to a kind of experimental fiction. So what I noticed through reading a lot of pulp writers, that they tended to repeat themselves. So if they liked a phrase, they'd repeat it through their books, as in what I took some of the phrases they used, like the bastard staggered backwards, spitting out gouts of blood and the occasional
Yes.
piece of broken tooth. Which was in Hells Angels books. Peter Cave, he used it more than once. And so I'd just take the phrase and use it repeatedly. But I thought you could kind of have a simulation of a pulp narrative, but it would be incredibly repetitive, so it would kind of deconstruct itself. So that was the kind of theoretical end of my early work, while the critics just thought I was trying to write pulp fiction, but it was a bit weird. They didn't realise I'd read Baudrillard.
Your first publisher got it, didn't they? Until they were sold to Edinburgh University Press. Is that it?
I've written the long short stories, 15, 20,000 word stories, so I thought I'd write a novel for, whatever reason. I thought it'd be interesting to see if I could get a publisher, and send it around a load of places and got rejections. And then Peter Kravitz, who I knew because I did a bit of writing for Edinburgh Review, and he was the guy who discovered James Kelman and Tom Leonard. Kelman obviously won the Booker, one of the more unusual writers to win the Booker, one of the few I actually think is a decent writer, in fact. And so he was a big deal in Scottish literature, and he had run Polygon when he was a student, but because it was run out of by the students at Edinburgh originally, he'd left. And I gave him a copy of my book and said, "Oh, I'm not having any luck getting this book published. Maybe you can suggest someone." He said, "Oh, did you just know EUP have bought up, Edinburgh University Press have bought up Polygon? And I just became the editor 6 weeks ago." I said no, because I didn't. And he said, "Well, if I like the book, we'll publish it." So he came back 2 weeks later and said, "Yeah, it's great, we'll publish it."
So he got it. He got the fact
yeah.
you were,
Playing
that it
with
was
the
a
form.
satire and a parody.
Yeah. And then EUP looked at it and didn't like it, and commissioned readers to look at it who didn't like it, and said it had no literary value. So they told him that he couldn't publish it, and he said, well, he'd committed to publishing it, and that he would leave if they wouldn't let him publish it, which was great of Peter Kravitz.
A man of principle, wow.
Really standing up for an author. I mean, really, really fantastic to have that level of support. So it was agreed that he could do the one book, and they wouldn't publish anything by me ever again.
So that was like a bit of a mixed blessing, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I bounced around different publishers for years, and I got incredibly rude rejections because, people would hear that I was doing interesting things, and then I'd send them a manuscript, and then they'd send me back a note saying that, I was a next door neighbour to a brown shirt, which is, the kind of supposed left faction in the original Nazi movement.
Yeah.
because they obviously didn't realise that I wasn't identifying with the characters, that I was being satiric and critical. But, it's maybe more obvious now because I've also, wrote a story in character as the cop who investigated my mother's death, and it's a pretty unpleasant piece that was in London Noir, edited by Cathy Evans. But if you see that, then you'll see that the kind of more anarchist figures also fit into the kind of same technique of using the character but actually not identifying with the character.
Of course, isn't that the whole essence of fiction, is to create a character that is not yourself?
No, exactly.
So,
I mean, occasionally you might be feeling lazy and write a Roman à clef, but
yeah, but then
most
that
of the
would get
time,
very, very boring very, very quickly, wouldn't it? If you're
yeah, if
constantly
that's what you
writing
did
about yourself.
if you did it every time, because you wouldn't have any new material.
Mm.
So yeah, that was the early works, and then I did 5 novels pretty much in that style. After
You
which
are
I got
incredibly prolific. You've published a lot of books.
yeah, yeah.
And haven't you also had book launches for fake books as well?
There was some people decided to do a book called Harry Potter and the Quantum Time Bomb and attribute it to me, and they had a launch for it. There's also a fake book called Stone Circle, which was written by a group of people as a kind of fiction project, which they attributed to me and published without me.
That's very funny, especially actually that can bring us quite neatly to 69 Things to Do with a Dead Princess,
Exactly, yeah.
which I've just finished reading that. It's very fun to read. It's although it polarizes a lot of people, I think, because in between literary discourse, there's an awful lot of sex.
Yeah,
And some people describe it as pornographic. I don't see it that way at all. It's actually very matter of fact. The way that it's described, it's almost like describing how you make a sandwich, or how you
yeah,
cook a
exactly,
recipe or
yeah.
something.
There's
Um,
also a very detailed description of a lot of Aberdeenshire stone circles. I mean, there
yes,
was
and
enormous.
I had no idea. Actually, you really bring Aberdeen to life in a way. I always thought it was a pretty grey, boring. I've only been there once or twice, but
No, I
and they
first
even
went
have
in.
their own dialect apparently.
Yeah, the Doric. It's and yeah, you'd hear all these old weird Scotch phrases from older people. I mean, I first went there in '84. Probably the
What
most.
took you to Aberdeen first?
A guy called Pete Horrobin, who I met in London, and he decided I was an interesting young artist because he was down in London for 6 months doing some events, and said I should come up to Scotland and see him.
Hang
And
on,
I was,
Stuart, we have to back up a second, because you becoming an artist was not you being really talented at art or drawing or any of that, and also not because you went to art school. You decided you were going to be an artist.
yeah.
So talk me through that process.
Well, I'd been a musician without being a musician, playing in punk bands. I literally started because a guy I knew who'd had a little punk band said, "Oh, we've got a ska band now." This was in '79. Why don't you be the bass player? I said, "Well, I got a guitar 6 months ago and I'm still learning it, and I don't have a bass and I don't know how to play." He said, "Oh, don't worry, we've got a bass and I'll show you what to play." So I was in a few bands after that. I did improve slowly, but was never that brilliant. But the music scene just seemed to be getting a bit boring by 1982. It's probably just an age thing, and you like certain things. I'm not knocking people who like later music, but most of what I liked, I like a lot of house and techno and stuff from later on, but not kind of rock music, which was what I was more competent to play. So yeah, having been able to do music without really knowing anything about it, I thought, why not become an artist? And it's really a matter of persuading people in the art world that you are an artist rather than having any innate talent. That was my
Which I'm sure is still probably very true. And so
yeah,
you describe it as manipulating the bureaucracy.
yeah.
So, so when you decided you wanted to be an artist, how did you actually go about doing that?
Well, I did some, I'd been familiar with Dada and
Hmm.
Futurism and Surrealism and all this stuff. Although Surrealism is more a literary movement than an artistic one, it's both, but the literature is probably more important. But I was familiar with all those kind of 20th century avant-gardes. So it was just a matter of trying to take up where they left off. And some of the early stuff I did was just take out ads saying things like, this is an advert, is this an advert this is, with a telephone number. So, I was advertising myself as a kind of artist who could be hired for parties and stuff in local newspapers. And so people would ring up saying, have you got a mobile disco? Because didn't think that someone would take out the odd ad to promote their art career and putting out manifestos and doing whatever and performance stuff. So, I knew bands, and so I could say, oh, can I support you? But I'd kind of read sound poetry and hurl carrots at the audience. But when they picked up the carrots and hurled them back, I then figured out I could throw dried peas at them, which would be hard to throw back, and they could slip on them as they were getting angry at me and running towards.
So you were conscious of their physical safety at all times.
Oh yeah, or my physical safety.
Your physical safety, yes.
But the trouble with the dried peas was every venue would ban me for using them.
Right.
I also got banned from, where was it? It was in Berkshire somewhere. I can't remember the name of the town. It was some little town in Berkshire, and I did a performance with a girl I worked with a lot at that time. We were declaring people to be living works of art, kind of post Gilbert and George way. So a couple of guys decided to have a sack race. We told them to get in these sacks, and they had decided to have a sack race, but then one of them pulled the other's trousers down, and that got me banned from the venue for life as well.
Even though it wasn't you who did it?
No, because we were having an evil kind of effect on the audience, making them pull each other's trousers down and stuff. From the work.
You were a corrupting influence.
Yeah, I was corrupting, and I've been banned from. I'm also banned from Brighton Pier for life, and I'm banned.
And who decides whether who on Brighton Pier is going to say, "That's Stewart Home, get off our pier"?
yeah, because we went and filmed a video on there. And I was banned from Filthy McNasties for life as well. Again, I was on with Ken Kesey from the Merry Pranksters, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And his audience didn't like me. It was a free event which Paul Smith from Blast First had put on. So, I was just winding them up more with doing my act, which the hippies didn't like. And there was some management meeting going on upstairs, so they didn't like all the noise. Ian Sinclair refused to read that night because the audience was so hostile to me. But Ken Kesey went down well. But I got banned for life. But, they're closed now. So the life ban didn't work.
I was going to say, I've never heard of Filthy McNasty. What a brilliant name, though.
Yeah, it was this kind of... they did a lot of literary events there. It just up on Penton Mount between Angel and King's Cross. But now it's some other pub, so I'm not banned from it anymore.
Well... It'll be interesting to see if anyone chucks you off Brighton Pier. Have you actually have you obeyed this stricture? I imagine not.
No, I've been back since. The ban was 30 years ago. I mean, they tell you you're banned for life. It doesn't work. But yeah, maybe if the West Pier would be more of a problem. But no, it was the one that's still standing. But yeah, I decided to become an artist, and I'd seen a piece about the stuff Pete Horrobin was doing. He was born in London and grew up in Hammersmith till he was 12. His mother was Scottish, so when he was 12 he went up to Kirkcaldy and then went to art school in Dundee. So he lived in Dundee for years and years, and he had this project where he wanted to bring back the image of the Highland tramp to Scotland. So he went around the Highlands pushing a pram. But I was living in a place that was originally squatted by David Medalla, so there was all his old performance art props. He's a Filipino artist who was a big deal in the 60s with these kinetic sculptures and stuff, and also did a lot of performance art. And he squatted a house in Kennington that I lived in for a while, so there was this old-fashioned 50s pram in there. So I took that up to Scotland, and then we used Super 8 cameras to film each other pushing the pram around to bring the image of the tramp with the pram back to the Highlands of Scotland. So we went up to Aberdeen and went out into the Aberdeenshire countryside, and that was my first trip there in 1984, and we were in a little village where the Scottish Sculpture Workshop is, basing ourselves out there, and with a Super 8 camera, the old boys who sort of sit on the edge of the village green for something to do all day if it's not raining, kind of came up and said, "Are you from the BBC?" when we've got this absolutely pathetic Super 8 camera, and shooting on out-of-date film stock, which you used to be able to buy then, so you'd save a lot of money, but it was fine, it wasn't a problem. But the real professionals wouldn't use the out-of-date stuff, but we did because it was cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was the first trip to Aberdeen, and then I love Aberdeen, and I'd always had an interest in stone circles. Got taken to a lot when I was a small child. Back in the days when you could actually play on Stonehenge and eat all your food, and
Hmm.
there were no ticket gates or anything, but not just Stonehenge, all over the place. When I in the 90s, I got very into going to a lot of stone circles, so I went around a lot of the ones in Aberdeenshire, and thought it would make a good book. So I got the idea on the 35 bus. I was actually going to see John King, who's a friend of mine, has been for years, who wrote Football Factory and all those books. So I had a council flat in Shoreditch, and he was always living down in Clapham. And I took Anne Quinn's Berg, which I first read when I was 18. Manager of one of the bands I was in gave it to me. He was an English teacher for his day job and couldn't believe that he had a musician in a band he was managing who read all these books that he thought were interesting, whether it was, William Burroughs or Rob Greer and all that stuff. So he wanted to turn me on to the English kind of equivalents, which weren't as well known. So he gave me a copy of several B.S. Johnson books, who was his favourite, but also Anne Quinn's Berg, which blew me away. Mm-hmm. So the opening of Dead Princess is kind of transferring Berg from Brighton to Aberdeen, and
Mm-hmm.
with the lines about if Brighton is San Francisco on the south coast, then Aberdeen is Los Angeles on the North Sea, because you kind of have this cruising culture around the beach. And, back in the days before people went to the Costa del Sol, it was a big place for people in Scotland. It does have a very nice beach. On a sunny day, it's beautiful. It's unfortunately not sunny every day in Aberdeen. And when the sun is out and the city is built of granite, it's called the Granite City. And the sun's sparkling on the granite, it does look really beautiful. So, and people didn't. I mostly set my books in London. I thought, why not set one in Aberdeen? That's a bit
I've got to
different.
say, I've never read a book set in Aberdeen before, so it was definitely a first.
Yeah, there are some, but not, it's not a hugely popular area. So and the stone circles. There's some serious research about stone circles. I mean, obviously, I'm not an archaeologist, but I did go to them all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But yeah, it was just the reading the Anne Quinn, and the fact that I've been visiting a lot of these stone circles in Aberdeenshire, and thinking, yeah, I can just translate one to the other.
So you mentioned Anne Quinn quite a lot. I've never read any of her stuff. Is it what really spoke to you in Anne Quinn books?
Well, it was the first one I read, which was her first book, Berg. The fact that she, was a kind of equivalent of the French Nouveau Roman, but in Britain, and I thought a lot more successful than people like Alan Burns. If you know, he what's his book on America. The manager of the band I was in gave me a copy of his fictionalized version of The Angry Brigade, which is a really terrible book. I mean, I've seen him talk, and don't know if he's still alive, but back in the day, about
Yeah.
his work at the ICA and stuff. But I'm not a huge fan. But Anne Quinn and Berg seem to be every bit as good as a kind of the French equivalent of that kind of novel, but have its Englishness and a kind of seedy, Brighton seaside. There's a ventriloquist dummy in it as well,
Yes.
although the dummy doesn't come alive and narrate a chapter as it does in my book when the narrator sleeps in. But yeah, she's just a really interesting writer. I mean, she committed suicide in, what was it, 73? So she only wrote 4 novels. But she was kind of forgotten for a while. But after I did my book, there was a big revival not that long after. Dalkey Archive
Must
reprinted
be
all her
quite
novels.
gratifying, actually, to revive
Yeah.
someone's work.
I don't think I can take all the credit, but its timing is always good. As I'm also doing with the yoga book, I mean, I've put it out just as Pilates is kind of overtaking yoga, but I can claim to have destroyed
Got the
yoga's
death knell of yoga.
user base, although it's just a fortunate coincidence. But
Yeah.
it's learning how to make those claims.
Well, yes, that's true. Yeah. So another author you mentioned in the Dead Princess book is Cathy Acker as well.
Yeah.
I thought
Well,
was
she was
like,
a friend. She was quite hard to get to know. I mean, she had this very outgoing persona, and I think I first met her because I showed the film Decoder at the Scala in 1989. I brought it over with director Klaus Mack, and we showed it in Glasgow and at the Scala in London. And she turned up to that, but she was quite shy with me. She said she was knackered from writing a book, But subsequently I did quite a few readings with her, and she's a fantastic reader.
Such an interesting backstory as well, her life, of the family she came from, and
No, exactly.
relationship with her mother, and
And a lot of very autobiographical writing as well, in fact, when we were talking about Roman class. But
some of the best writing is.
yeah. So, I was British Council writer in residence in Tampere in Finland when she died, but it was really heartbreaking news, the cancer in 97. But yeah, just she was someone around, but who I I didn't read a huge number of times with her, but the times I did, which was several, she was just a fantastic person to read with because she was such a great performer of her work. And also, when she died, I felt she'd really died at the wrong time because her career, writers' careers have ups and downs, and she was definitely on a down phase at that time. I guess me and other friends of hers in London were afraid that she'd be forgotten. That hasn't turned out that way. There's been the Chris Kraus biography. There's another biography, I believe, as well, although I've only read the Chris Kraus one. And she's had quite a revival, which is fantastic. But I think one of the reasons I wanted to put her in the book was that she wasn't big at that time. In fact, Chris Kraus's book I Love Dick is also mentioned.
Yes,
in
it
the
is.
book.
Yeah. Well, actually, to be fair, you mentioned so many books in Dead Princess, so many that I'd never even heard of, and so thanks to you, I actually looked up a few of them, and that was one of them, Cathy Evans' book. So yeah, I would look out for her stuff.
No, she's great and very experimental. The idea I had with Dead Princess was to slam kind of three things together, which was the stone circles, literary criticism, and I deliberately went and looked for kind of failed books. So I was going to remainder stores, which is harder to do now as there aren't so many. But back in the late 90s, you still had a lot of remainder bookshops where books that hadn't sold would be sold off cheap. Mm-hmm. So I just go and buy anything that I thought looked interesting. Chris Kraus didn't come that way because I've met Dick Hebditch, but I don't know him well, but I have friends who are very close to him, so everyone was going on about Chris Kraus's book I Love Dick, which is allegedly
brilliant title.
Yeah. And I was looking out for that, and I found some copies in the ICA bookshop, so I think I bought all 10 or whatever it was because I knew all these people who wanted a copy of it. So that didn't get in through the remainder thing. But I had the idea of the female narrator because I wouldn't always want to narrate in a male voice. My early book.
Yeah, was that your first go at being a female narrator?
No, I don't think it was. I can't remember actually. I'd have to think about it in order. It may have been.
How did you find writing from a female perspective? Did you have to change anything, or did you just?
No, I didn't. I didn't particularly worry about it. I just thought you'll confidently announce that you're a female narrator, and people believe it. What I was more worried about was getting the Scottish accent correct, which was why I used the narrator was English, but a student in Aberdeen. So that kind of solved the problem of getting a Scottish accent correct.
That is true. Yeah,
the Doric one, which would have been difficult. But
just give them an incomprehensible accent.
Yeah. But the plot is basically the narrator is having a nervous breakdown, and she either meets or is hallucinating an older guy interested in books. So they discuss all these books through the text. They're investigating a theory that Princess Diana's body was ritually carried around all these stone circles in Aberdeenshire. So they take a dummy weighed down with bricks around to the stone circles to see if it's possible that this could have been done. So that's how, and obviously, having a dummy in stone circles, you have to have sex taking place.
Of course you do. And also,
it gave me the three elements, but obviously a lot of their relationship is based on discussing literature. There's a more recent novel I did called She's My Witch, which a lot of the relationship between the male and female character is based on discussing music of a certain era. So there's those elements. I went out and found books that had essentially failed and been sold off as remainder stock in the bookshops and read through them just to summarise in a paragraph of conversation between the two characters.
Okay.
So it's not an easy way to get a paragraph to have to read an entire book.
No, that's true.
Although
it's very dedicated of you.
Yeah, no, as a reviewer, I've always believed no matter how much I dislike a film or book or album, I'll get through to the end before I review it.
It was a good way of parodying the whole media circus around Princess Diana's death and, the cult of celebrity, which I suppose really took off in the 70s and 80s. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
well, actually, that's probably not true. It's probably
no,
always been.
Marilyn
That's always been a
Monroe
cult.
or, Greta Garbo, you can go back,
Mm.
yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, it was a very strange experience, the Princess Di thing, because, I had a flat in Shoreditch, which is fairly central in London. And when she died, all I heard was people making jokes about her. The one that sticks in my mind was what was Princess Di's favourite record, "The Wall" by Pink Floyd. But you hear these jokes. There was one.
My brother, we told an awful lot of Princess Diana, very tasteless teenagers as well. Actually, we weren't teens, we were sort of 20s, but my brother lost a girlfriend because of it. She was so disgusted at the bad taste of my brother and his sisters that,
Yeah,
she decided that this relationship, this family was not for her. And probably just as well because it was evident in other ways.
yeah. So, it was this bizarre thing and, I was just hearing people making those jokes in the pub or whatever. It was people around me. I wasn't necessarily being told them directly, but no one seemed at all bothered by Princess Di's death. And yet, in the media, the whole nation was mourning, so it's quite bizarre.
I think
Uh,
it's quite possible to have been, to feel the pathos of someone's death and yet to find a joke about it funny. There's
yeah,
no contradiction there at all. And
yeah,
there were certain things that were really heartbreaking, like the two little boys behind the coffin and all that. But a joke's a joke, isn't it? And actually, there's not enough in life to laugh about, so, you're foolish to turn down a joke, even if it's in bad taste.
yeah. Certainly, there were a lot of people who weren't bothered by the death.
Well, they didn't know her. That's the whole
No,
thing, isn't
exactly.
it?
Well, I didn't know her. I've
They
never
didn't know her.
understood.
Yeah,
I was upset when Cathy Acker died because I knew her, but
exactly.
someone, obviously it's upsetting for friends and family of someone who dies, but just because I've heard about them in the newspapers, it's not upsetting to me.
I remember that the morning it happened, I'd just come in from a really, really late night, and I was staying at my friend's house. We were both really hungover, and she went to have a shower, and I couldn't understand why the music in the kitchen was all mournful on the radio because I was trying to change channels, thinking I don't want to listen to this boring stuff. I want to stay awake
Yeah,
a bit, and then the DJ, whoever it was, announced that Princess Diana had died. And my friend came out of the shower and I said, Deb, you never guess what? This is what happened. And, Diana's dead. She goes, bloody hell, just when she got her hair right. So
yeah,
yeah, no, you're right. There are a lot of people who I think it was some sort of cathartic outpouring for them. It was weird. It was like a national, people had been possessed or something. It was very strange.
yeah.
So,
But yeah, we see it again and again. I mean, the Charlie Kirk thing seems to have died down now, but it was absolutely bizarre reactions when that happened. Obviously, I'm against any kind of vanguardist terrorist action like
mm.
that, but at the same time, I actually knew who he was, but it was bizarre because most people in the UK didn't. I was actually
I
aware of.
knew who he was as well. He popped up on YouTube a lot, for example. But I mean, I'm the same as you. I just think, obviously I didn't know him, but I don't agree with violence in any way, shape, or form. And,
Yeah,
I just feel really sorry for his family. And also, after his death, the people who are, so for example, there's a big hoo-ha about the Oxford Union guy who sort of said, oh, Charlie Kirk's died, woohoo. Actually, it may not be to your taste, but he actually has every right to say that.
yeah, yeah,
Like, freedom of speech does go both ways, doesn't it?
yeah,
So, as George Orwell said, you don't have the right not to be offended.
yeah.
So, anyway, but these are questions which not everyone is very rational about.
No, I agree. The killer looks like a kind of confused 22-year-old, and people are desperately trying to stick quite opposite politics on him. But whether he could even tell you why he did it, I don't know. he's just, in the phrase, he was very online, and it's very hard to decipher what his real motivations were. But it doesn't particularly, people insisting he was a follower of Nick Fuentes or insisting that he was a leftist, neither of it makes a lot of sense to me, because I don't think we've got the evidence even now, and I don't think he necessarily knows why he did it.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
But also there seems to be this desire always to pinpoint blame about, so that's one man's decision to do this thing, and yet there's this blame game going on between left and right, and it's just crazy to me. It's like one man's decision, it was a terrible thing. Whatever you may think of Charlie Kirk, he was a family man, he had 2 little kids, and no one should have shot him. It's as simple as that. But to blame a whole section of society for his death is just nuts.
Yeah.
So anyway, people are not as queer as folk.
Yeah.
So anyway, going back to Peter Horrobin in Aberdeen, can you tell me about the art strike?
Oh yeah, that just followed on.
Was that the next thing, or am I missing anything out that's important?
No, we can just flip to that, because we were talking about how I decided to become an artist as a kind of bureaucratic strategy. So I started in 1982, bureaucratic manipulation, and it took me a little while to feel my way into different parts of the art world. So in 1985, I always used to go back and look at a lot of figures who I found interesting in the world, in the art world, or in literature, or whatever else. And I was really fascinated by a figure called Gustav Metzger, who did auto-destructive art in the 60s. He actually had a career comeback, but in the mid-80s he was older people in the London art world knew who he was, but younger people didn't. He was kind of forgotten. And I came across this text in an ICA catalogue when I was looking through material, looking for inspiration, about an art strike. So he declared an art strike in 1974 to go from 1977 to 1980, which he appeared to do. And he genuinely thought artists could kind of destroy the gallery system and seize control of the distribution of their own work, which by
so sweet in a way that he believed that, because obviously what would happen if the artists stopped producing, then the second tier of artists would just take their place, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but I think you have to look at it in context. So, we had the effects of the oil crisis kicking in then, the 70s oil crisis, but it wasn't kind of absolutely clear that there were going to be an endless series of defeats for the working class following on from this. So I think in the context of the time, you can understand why he might have had that kind of optimism. I don't think it was an absolutely ridiculous position if you actually situate it historically, but it looks ridiculous now, and it looked ridiculous in 1985.
Actually, I don't think it's ridiculous. I think it was misguided, put it that way, or idealistic.
But sometimes idealism's good as well.
Sorry?
And sometimes idealism is good, because
it is.
it's inspiring.
Yes.
But I thought, well, I don't know if my plan to become a successful artist is going to work. This was in 1985. In the following year, I got my first reviews in the kind of national press and stuff, and in the art press. So for a group show I was in called Ruins of Glamour, using a fake name, but I often use fake names to do things. So it had taken off, but I decided to have an art strike from 1990 to 1993, which would have given me a good opportunity to bow out if I hadn't had any success up to that point as well.
Exactly, yes.
But I saw it more as a kind of propaganda exercise to annoy the art world, to say that the art world and artists on the whole think that art is a good thing and contributes something positive to the world. Well, let me tell you that it's actually completely negative, which wasn't what they were wanting to hear. So it was more on the level of a kind of propaganda exercise, although I did take the chance to retire from my cultural production, which was actually making me a living by the late 80s, and had to sign back on the dole for 3 years.
Your time as an artist actually made you a living?
Yeah, well, artist and writing, because I was getting the books published, and you have to remember that advances for books have generally gone down.
Oh my word, or they're non-existent. Now you just have to rely on the sales, yeah.
Yeah, well, I did get an advance for Fascist Yoga, but it was less than some of the advances I was getting in the 90s. So it was easier to make a living, and also you could there was more guest lecturing in universities, particularly the art schools, which the universities just don't have the budget to bring in external people for the students, which is great for the students
So
because
were you invited as an artist to go and talk to students at universities?
yeah, and do crits and all that kind of
That
stuff.
is so perfect. So you really managed to to
Yeah.
infiltrate that world.
I mean, it's harder to get that work now, and also journalism. I was in Oxford today to do a piece of journalism, but there's less well-paid journalism around than there was back then as well. So it was
Well, the
much
trouble is there's so much free content, isn't there? So,
exactly, yeah. So it was just a lot easier to make a living. Not living high on the hog, but getting by. So yeah,
but you had a this brilliant moment, didn't you, when you first went over to New York on a courier flight? You had a moment in a gallery which I think every author would just kill for. So go on, tell
yeah.
us about that.
So yeah, for people who don't know what courier flights were, back in the days before the internet, businesses needed documents transported between places. So I think a flight to New York in the late 80s probably, well, cost hundreds of pounds, which I didn't have. But I did have a friend in New York who I could stay with. And if you only took cabin baggage and couriered business documents for your whole baggage, you could get a flight for, I think it was 25 quid I paid for that flight. So I
And
went over.
did you have to apply through a travel agent or how did it
I
work?
think there was just some office, and you rang up and said you wanted to do it, and you paid them the 25 quid, and then you had to turn up at the airport, and they gave you the ticket. You signed for the documents that were in the hold. You never touched them. You had some
Wow,
dockets, and then you handed them over at the other end, and you got your cheap flight to New York and back.
brilliant.
And then you could go to the thrift store and buy a load of clothes. There was, I mean, some great clothes in American thrift stores in the 80s.
There still
And
are on the Lower East
yeah,
Side. It's amazing.
really cheap.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I, got to New York, got the Village Voice, saw there was a Henry Flint show, and Henry Flint was an artist who I thought had given up art, and because he said that art was the imposition of other people's subjectivity on you, and that you should develop your own subjectivity, which he called Bren. But there was a show by him at Emily Harvey Gallery on Broadway in Spring. I thought, well, Henry Flint showing again. I have to go and see that. Fantastic. So I went to the show and spent a long time looking at the work. And the lady invigilating said to me, "Oh, you seem very interested in this. You spent a really long time looking at Henry's work. Have you heard of a guy called Stewart Home?" Because there seems to be a lot of interest in England. After she'd heard my accent, I said, "Oh yeah, I am Stuart. I have heard of myself." Uh, and she said, "Oh, fantastic! You'll have to meet Henry, and you've got to meet Lamont Young, and blah blah blah." So from this one contact, I started meeting all the kind of cream of the avant-garde. And my friend, who was working construction jobs, but now has a successful artistic career, but back then was still trying to get it off the ground. Or he couldn't believe it, so I'd go back to his place in early evening, and he'd shake me down for who have you met today? What invites have you got? And he'd be, oh yeah, we'll go to this one. This is good. This is good, because he knew the New
Amazing.
York scene. But literally, we were going to like Gerald Malanga's birthday party in Chelsea, the guy who did the whip dance of the Velvet Underground, part
How
of
long were you there for in New York that trip?
3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Okay. And so
And
how long did it because you went there, didn't you, to go and track down the
Ben
writers?
Maria from Black Mask up against a wall motherfucker who
Yeah.
no one had heard of, no one knew what I was talking about. And I found all his publications in Newcastle when I came back, which I've been looking for. Librarian from Newcastle University had them all, Ron Hunt, and kindly photocopied them all for me. But yeah, I went to New York looking for that stuff. I mean, he's had a comeback now, Ben, and I've met him. But no, I mean, literally, we'd go to Gerald Malanga's birthday party, and we'd meet Billy Name, and who obviously did the silver foil for the factory and was the big photographer for Warhol. But all the Warhol people, it was just a couple of years after Warhol's death, were kind of in eclipse.
Mm.
So he couldn't believe that we knew who he was, Billy Name. I mean, a few years later, he probably wouldn't be surprised. And you know, people like Carly Schliemann who did Meat Joy, being told that I was an important British critic. So, you know, she'd be coming up to me and she thought I was interested in Fluxus, so telling me she was a Fluxus artist. But, you know, no, you're not. You know, you're an important happenings artist. I knew exactly who she was. But no, it was great. Met all these, John Hendricks from Guerrilla Art Action Group. You know, I have my own little interests, but all that kind of downtown into midtown scene, just meeting people. And it was just luck that literally the first day I arrived there one night, and the next day I got the Village Voice and went to the Henry Flint show and got my introduction to everyone. So,
well, it's better to be lucky than good, isn't it?
yeah,
So,
exactly. And it wasn't what I was expecting. I thought I was just going to be going around looking for this guy who was considered pretty obscure by anyone I mentioned him to, if they'd even heard of him.
yeah.
But who's had a big comeback subsequently and has an interesting series of interviews as a kind of autobiography put out quite recently called Full Circle. And he's a great painter as well.
It was back on Henry Flint.
No, I'm Ben Maria. But
Oh,
Flint,
sorry,
Flint I
yes.
met on that,
Okay.
that trip, but I was looking for Ben. Not for Henry Flint, but Henry Flint was visible, so I went and saw his work and got introduced to the whole scene. So that was good, yeah. But
And did you keep in touch with all that lot, or?
with Ben, Maria, with some of them, you know, Henry got a little bit mad at me because he realised that I found some of his work humorous. So I revived some of his slogans, like demolish serious culture, because he had a group called Action Against Cultural Imperialism in the 60s. I mean, he stood in for John Cale in the Velvet Underground. There's a lot of those kind of connections. And he's a brilliant musician. I mean, his music is absolutely fantastic. He's quite critical of a lot of, he's very critical of Western kind of music, which he sees as very foursquare. He's really into the rhythm. But yeah, he's very serious about his philosophy. And I found something.
So he didn't enjoy being poked fun at.
Well, I wasn't poking fun. It's just that I found some of his ideas amusing. But, you know, I
Fair
laugh
enough.
when I read Hegel. You know, everyone gets off on their own thing.
So that concludes the first half of my chat with Stewart. By the time we'd finished, we'd been talking for about 2 hours, so we decided to split this into 2 episodes. So join us for the second episode, where Stewart discusses what propelled him to expose the underbelly of Western yoga practice, and we talk about the wellness industry in general. Thank you very much for joining the Indie Book Club. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Indie Book Club. I'm your host, Cathy Evans from Inkspot Publishing, who sponsor all these podcasts. To all cooks, dog walkers, and drivers out there, we'd love to see you next time. Bye.